Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. A recent report by The Times suggests that Ukraine could develop a basic nuclear device within months should U.S. military support wane, a scenario driven by concerns over Ukraine's strategic defense. The report discussed the possibility of a plutonium-based weapon potentially acting as a deterrent amid escalating tensions with Russia. Here to share her insights on the feasibility and implication of this development is Veronika Poniscjakova, Deputy Director of the Portsmouth Military Education Team. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we dive into the topic, we're also trying to figure out just how much the incoming Trump administration might be able to cooperate with Ukraine. And people are now trying to read the tea leaves a little bit by looking at Trump's cabinet picks and hopefully trying to decipher his stance towards the war in Ukraine. Do you think there's any names that kind of spark some interest? Or when you look at the cabinet picks, do you see any tendencies on how Trump might be interacting when it comes to Ukraine's security?
Well, thus far, his picks don't suggest that Trump is likely to be supporting Ukraine in the same manner as the Biden administration has in the past 2 years and a half. Picks, including, for example, his pick for the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense. They don't really. They're not very keen on supporting Ukraine financially going forward, and they could possibly pitch an idea that Ukraine should consider some excessive territorial concessions to Russia. At the same time, I think that we need to wait because there is a difference between Trump, trying to win votes in the United States prior to the election, and Trump actually being in power. And we should also consider the influence of other people who may not even necessarily be part of the administration, but they still can wield some significant influence over Trump. For example, some good pro-Russian, pro-Ukraine congressmen and senators in the Republican Party, like Lindsey Graham. He has always supported Ukraine quite strongly, and he is a supporter of, President Trump. So I think we should not underestimate the role of people who may not be part of the administration itself.
Right, very good point. Judging by Trump's 2016 presidency, we do see that after becoming president, his rhetoric kind of shifted a little bit depending on whoever is working alongside the president. Now, one of the alarming pick is Elisa Stefanik as his pick for UN ambassador, as she kind of declined to stand by previous support for Ukraine joining in NATO. Does that mean that Ukraine's, NATO's aspiration is going to meet some sort of roadblock?
Well, potentially. At the same time, I think we need to realize that the Trump administration is only going to be in power for 4 years. And Ukraine is not going to be joining NATO in the near future anyway. They will only be able to do that once the war with Russia is over. So I think it's really too early to say anyway. Okay. And I think we also need to bear in mind that NATO is not just about the United States, and the other states will have a say as well. And once again, they will be able to build some influence over Trump.
Right. Zelensky has said before that they need some sort of protection, be it NATO or nuclear weapons, which brings us into this topic that's reporting by The Times, suggesting that Ukraine could potentially seek that route. How feasible, how possible do you think that actually could be?
I would personally say this is not feasible at all. First of all, there were some suggestions that this is something Zelensky pitched to Trump himself, but this is not going to happen. First of all, Ukraine is a signatory to the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and based on that alone, Ukraine should not be seeking any kinds of nuclear weapons. Plus, there could be some other repercussions. Even if Ukraine decided to pursue this option, it is very likely to assume that the Western states, not just the United States, but also other ones, France, UK, others, they would not be happy with that. The whole world, as per the NPT, is trying to limit nuclear weapons, or if not just decrease the number, at least keep the status quo. So Ukraine pursuing this option would go against everything that the NPT currently stands for. Of course, Russia doesn't necessarily care about NPT as much as the rest of the world, but the Western world would never let Ukraine get away with this.
Right. Well, Ukraine does have historical experience with nuclear disarmament back in 1996. Do you think that's going to influence current discussion when it comes to nuclear deterrence, seeing that they've essentially had the short end of the stick by agreeing to a previous memorandum?
The fact is that they were perhaps hurt by that decision. Of course, the idea was that they would give up the Soviet nuclear weapons stationed in Ukraine, and other countries did that as well, Kazakhstan, Belarus. And in exchange for that, Ukraine and the others, they were supposed to get some security guarantees, amongst others. Well, the states that were supposed to provide these security guarantees included Russia, which is, quite ironic given that Russia is the aggressor in this conflict.
Now, some are floating the idea that perhaps this nuclear deterrence discussion is more of a bargaining position, that even by developing not full-scale nuclear weapon, but some plutonium-based weapons like small arms might be able to give them a better standing when it comes to going into negotiation with Vladimir Putin. Do you think that's sort of a possibility?
I don't think this would work particularly well. And I think what we have to consider here is not just the Ukraine side, but the Russian side, and what kind of nuclear policy they have. And Russian nuclear policy is quite actually clear. They outline 4 cases under which they would use their nuclear weapons. And one of them, which is the most relevant point here, is that they would use their nuclear weapons in response to an act of aggression against the Russian Federation, where the very existence of the state is threatened. And the thing is, how they understand the whole concept of aggression. It is quite open to interpretation. And for example, they said that NATO enlargement is a form of aggression. Or, for example, NATO or other Western states supplying arms to Ukraine, that is a form of aggression against Russia. Imagine if Ukraine actually was developing nuclear weapons. This would give Russia, this would empower them. This would motivate Russia to use nuclear weapons. So again, I think this is very unlikely that Ukraine would actually pursue this option because this could massively backfire against them.
Right, and I think the official announcement coming from Ukraine also echoes your sentiment, as this article from Time has suggested that Ukraine could develop basic nuclear devices, and well, Ukraine is they already said that this isn't something that they might be pursuing. But with those out of the way, and perhaps Ukraine being on shaky grounds when it comes to international support, especially from the United States, what alternative path do you see Ukraine having to enhance its national security should external support becoming less certain?
This is perhaps the most difficult question to ask, because at the moment the situation is really tough on the front line. Yes, support from the United States could greatly diminish after the next Trump administration is sworn in. So at this moment, all they can hope for is to persevere and make sure and hope for the continued Western support, even though it may not include the United States. But as long as they have all the other ones, all the other strong Western states, including European Union and the rest of NATO, that is their best shot at the moment.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And thank you for watching this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.